right. We are rolling. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Just to kind of kick things off, go kind of over what we're doing here tonight. So we held the city council held a town hall on November 18th to talk about kind of reactions since the Headlee Override vote took place early in November. Tonight we're going to kind of go through some of the information we received there. We're going to go through a little bit of information as to the importance of Headlee to the operating revenue for the city, kind of why we've had a Headlee override for the last couple of years, go through some of the cost pressures the city is facing, and then go through some scenarios as to what are the options moving forward. As we go through the night, we're going to have a couple interactive questions. In the chairs by the aisle, you'll see sheets with the same slide that's up here right now. You can use that QR code to scan and sign in to be able to participate, or you can go through and use the website and that code. Other than that, throughout the night, we'll open up for questions and feedback. I do ask, we're going to have a couple wireless mics going around. We are showing this on YouTube right now. If you guys are talking from the back, the mics won't pick it up and they won't hear it online. All right, so with that. And by the way, for those who don't know, I'm James Curzan, the interim city manager. All right, so November 18th, we held the town hall to receive feedback and start looking for a community solution. Residents voiced support for the city services that are provided, but they want to see some constraint on spending. Residents voiced support for a more modest Headlee override. Some of the issues that residents had about the November proposal, they didn't like that it was all-inclusive, that we had the operating police and fire facility and the Martin Road Rec facility bundled together for a total Headlee reset. The too high of a request, going from the current 15.7-ish to 20 mils was a lot for people. And then the other was that there was no expiration for the operating millage. It was going to be levied in perpetuity. So a little bit of history here for the last now, looks like eight years. We've been operating somewhere between a 16.9 mil levy and a 15.7 mil levy. As a note, for a good number of years during this last Headlee override, we did not levy the full amount. Instead of levying the full 5.4552, we levied a lesser amount to get to a consistent 16.9917 mils for a number of years in there. Only in about 2021, as our original charter millage levy kept rolling back to a point where we needed to be able to use that whole voter-authorized additional operating millage to get close to that 16.9, which we haven't been able to do since 2020. As you see, our charter millage has been rolling back truly since, for sure, 1994, when we no longer were able to start rolling it back up when we had property value loss. It's consistently gone down the last number of years. So what does this mean? What is our general fund made up of when it comes to revenue? We just talked a little bit about property taxes. We are limited in the growth in property taxes we collect by both Headlee and Prop A. If taxable value on existing properties grows at a rate where we're going to be able to collect more than inflation or 5% on property taxes, we have to roll back our operating millage. Prior to Prop A, if the opposite were to occur, we could have rolled up our property millage to be able to continuously collect a consistent amount of property taxes to provide the services that residents need. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do that since the passage of Prop A, which hadn't been an issue. Over the time from 1994 until about 2008, property values continuously rose. And so consequently, our millage rate would decline. Unfortunately, in 2008 and the subsequent years, a property value crash occurred throughout the country, specifically hitting older communities and communities here in Southeast Michigan, where we dropped about a third of our property value in just a number of years. And unfortunately, our millage rate could not change. This is where we originally got our first Headlee Override to try and recoup some of the revenue that we lost during that time. Other general fund revenue sources are variable revenue. So this is going to be grants, charges for services, fines and fees that are collected by the court. Grants usually are tied specifically to projects. We don't usually look for grants to cover operating expenses, because what do you do when that grant goes away? You have to stop the operating expense or find a different way to fund it. So they're tied to projects. So when you're looking at our general fund revenue, you might sometimes see fluctuations based on whatever projects we're working through with grants. Charges for services. These are things, for example, building permits. These are things that not everybody uses all at the same time in the same year. Specific individuals are using it, and therefore we cover the costs through charges for services. Something that's really important here, we can only charge a fee to recover the cost of providing that service. We can't make a profit. We're not business. We are here to provide service, and so we can't charge more than it costs us to provide the service. Also, there's Headlee restrictions involved here, as well as other state laws. When we're talking building permits, the Construction Code Act is pretty specific on what we can charge for building permits. And then the other main bucket of general fund revenue is state shared revenue. This comes from two sources from the state, all tied to sales tax revenue. And there's the constitutional formula, which truly doesn't change much. It fluctuates very minorly throughout every year, only by a couple $100,000. And at this point now, that makes up about 2/3 of our revenue sharing. And then there's also an annual appropriation that the state legislature or provides to municipalities. But this requires approval from the state legislature to be able to collect this money. At this point now, this state makes up about the other third of state revenue sharing. Back in 2003, this was flipped. Our constitutional revenue sharing made up about a third, as opposed to the annual appropriation, which made up about 2/3. The annual appropriation has gone from approximately $2.1 million in 2003 down to this next year. It's been rising, thankfully, slowly. We're estimated to be at about 1.2 million, so about half over the last 21 years. So at the same time as we have these handcuffs, to be able to raise revenue, to provide the services required, we have cost pressures. Our general fund is generally made up of the following costs. We've got 69% of it tied up in personnel. Because we are a government, we provide service. Service means people. So 69% is personnel. Another 13%, so total 82% here, are tied to people. That 13% is legacy costs. These are promises we made to employees years ago that we need to make sure we maintain. These are pensions. These are retiree health care. Now, we've reformed all of our legacy systems. However, we still have those long-term costs for the time being. And then the other 18% is made up of capital expenditures. If you watched the council meeting last night, I presented the capital improvement plan. So these are improvements, construction, rehab to city facilities, infrastructure, vehicles, and all of that. And then the operational expenses. This as far down as needing to buy pens, and as big as, software for being able to do things like this. As I said, 70% almost is people. Of our people, 80% are union. We currently are at a point where we have 5 of our 6 union contracts coming up for renewal this year. And as you see, in our unions, we still have vacancies for positions. This is something we have to be aware of as we move forward. And really, none more so than when we look at our police department. Since we last negotiated union contracts in 2021, we have fallen behind other communities. We were competitive. We were right in the middle of our neighbors, Royal Oak, Madison Heights, East Point, and then us. We were right in the middle. Since then, we have fallen behind to a point where we are significantly at a disadvantage for recruitment, retention, and this is something we have to address. We need to be able to maintain a quality department with quality officers, and so we need to be attractive to new recruits and our current people who have been with us through all this time. And about 83% of police and fire budgets are personnel. So what have we done since the Headlee Override failure in November? First thing, we took the feedback. We have downsized the Martin Road Rec facility. Instead of moving forward with the full multi-purpose community building, we are utilizing the grant funding that we had collected to be able to provide a restroom concession building that can help support the activities in Martin Road Park, specifically the splash pad and the ball diamonds right there. We are deferring other major building construction. We're starting to look at options to do a voter-authorized general obligation bond for the public safety headquarters. So this will be another ballot issue in the future that we need to look at. And then what we're doing tonight, we're looking for a new voter-authorized operation millage and looking to address what it was we had. So at the moment, I'm going to give you guys a chance. If anybody has any questions before we start moving on. I just kind of want to open this up. As I've been telling everybody, this is kind of an open forum, but also with presentation. So I do want to stop every now and again, breathe, give everybody a chance to ask questions, because this is heavy information. So with that, is there any questions anybody might have? Yeah. And yes, again, reminder about the microphone. We are broadcasting and on YouTube, so we can't hear at home if we're not using the mics.
Hi, my name is Dave Hoppy. I live on University. I was a member of the Finance Committee. We did a lot of this hashing around about when we were debating on what the recommendation to City Council was going to be. I was curious if any time has been spent looking back at those debates when we talked about something other than a full override.
We've been we've been looking at everything.
I mean, they were in January. Well, I mean, at one point, everybody had, I think the assignment was, if you were king for a day and you could have, and you could just say this is what it was going to be. And everyone went around, and that was before everyone came to the conclusion, well, the majority of the committee wanted to recommend to City Council for a full override. But there were some pretty detailed ideas presented at that time, which is essentially what we're doing now. So I was just curious how much time has been spent looking back at that work we did.
Absolutely. Time has been spent on it. Time has been spent looking back at that and also looking forward, continuing to address what we might need to do in the future.
Well, by looking back, I mean, looking back at the discussions that we were having in January, which was about a year ago now, about something other than a full override that could possibly work with a pretty well-informed committee. That's all.
And I think you're gonna find some of that coming forward here. Yeah. Okay, so first topic I want to hit on with the interactive polling. But first, before that, if everybody has a chance, I'm going to go to that again so everybody can take a look. If you have your phone, you can scan from there. Again, we have some instruction sheets through the aisleway there. I'll give you guys a couple minutes to try and sign into it. Okay. So, as we heard, one of the big issues residents had with the November proposal was that it wasn't time bound. It was in perpetuity. So, to that effect, our first question tonight, if I can get it going. If we looked at a 10-year Headlee override, you got three options here. Is that too long? Is that about right? Is that too short? If you need Wi-Fi access, it looks like Jenny's going around with the credentials. Thank you, Jenny. How are we doing online, Eddie? Uh, Okay, we'll close this one out in just a minute. So it's looking so far, um, 10-year override, I'm seeing mostly about right and too short. Um, I totally can understand all three feelings on this. Doing a 10-year override, here, we'll be back here again 10 years from now. Absolutely. It's the nature of the mechanics of Headlee. About right, that's people are pretty comfortable with stuff we've been doing. We've done a 10-year override for the last 9 years now. I can understand the comfort level there. And then too long, of course, I know there are opinions that every 4, every 2, every 5 years we should be coming back for this. So thank you everybody for your feedback. I think it'll stay up for a little bit, but we'll go back here now. So the first option that we're going to talk about tonight and explore, this would be to restore the voter-authorized operating millage to the 2015 level. As you may remember, 2015, the Headlee Override authorized the city to levy an additional 5.445 mils. And as I showed on the previous slides, a little bit back, we didn't start levying the full authorized amount that had actually been rolled back at that point until about 2021. So what this would look like is we would add an additional 5.445 mils above the charter millage rolled back to 11.19. So this would be a total of 16.6425 mils for the next tax year, which is very, very similar to our level in fiscal year 2022, which was 16.6159. Looking at this and projecting out, and I'll just preface this for every one of these models. Every model we do, every millage we request, we have to maintain an eye for efficiencies. We have to be able to make some course corrections in our spending to be able to address projected deficits in the future. every single one of these models, including if we had we have adopted the November request, we still would have had to be looking at course corrections to address deficits. So I just want to preface that there. In this model, we would be projected to hit a deficit in 2031. So this one gives us a good amount of time to be able to make some of these course corrections at the same time as levying a proper millage that will help us meet the needs currently and towards the future. So on that, I'm going to open up another Mentimeter poll here. Renewing at this level, is this too much? Is this too little? Is this about right? And I think after we do the vote here, we'll do another round of questions and get some feedback. So I guess while we're finishing up the votes, and are there any thoughts, any questions, any feedback we want to give on this one? Yeah, Quinn.
Hello, my name is Quinn Ziegler. I chaired the Finance Review Committee. So I'm a little bit more familiar with this than perhaps, you know, an average person who's watching online. James, could you clarify, at the 2015 level, does this mean no additional investment in maintaining our buildings? Because that's obviously something that was very important to the Facilities Task Force, which I also had an opportunity to serve on. And on the Finance Review Committee, we learned that the city of Ferndale is performing or is budgeting for building maintenance at significantly lower than the industry standard rate of building maintenance. So does this level allow for additional and appropriate building maintenance?
So this would essentially keep us pretty much on current spending trends. Now, that's not to say by potentially finding different areas, making course corrections on other spending, we can't reprioritize, but no. This currently assumes maintaining our next 3-year triennial budget and then inflationary spending on that. So this doesn't really take into account that as in the model.
Mike Thompson, West Troy Street. So are you asking for an additional mill to the initial override? We're not talking about adding a building, right? You're asking for...
No, this would be just operational. This would be about a 1.2 mil increase over what we're currently levying,
Okay.
but to what was originally authorized in 2015. So this would restore the Headlee Override to its original amount.
So are those funds, do they have a home already? Or
So what this will do, hang on, let me take a look at I have it. So what this will do is essentially provide the adequate funding to address inflationary increases in the short term.
Okay, what would be an example of inflationary pressure rate? I mean, obviously I know what that means, but give me an example.
The major one is going to be the wages for police.
Okay, so, and I'm asking this with sincerity so I can get clarification.
Yes.
I'm curious about the Medicare Advantage. Is that, first of all, what is that savings? Where's the money going? And also, can we sort of show the work of what those increases in wages look like? I saw the slide for the police officers in Royal versus Ferndale. I don't know how many employees Ferndale has, but, I understand 3%, but, we have to, it's more than 3% for those guys. It's going to be closer to 10% or something that they need. So I guess I'm just trying to identify where those dollars are going, that you're asking for, and go ahead.
Right, so looking at this option, we have to keep in mind the fact that property taxes generally are not going to grow very fast, right? Initially, that first year of the levy, we would see an increase, which would be pretty much offset by the inflationary increase on all of the unions, but also police. And then also just everything else is costing more. Health insurance for employees is costing more. Other personnel-related expenses are costing more. From then on, we don't increase general revenue, just projecting out. That would put us where we would increase over the life of this about $700,000 from the first year we levy it to the last year. That doesn't really keep up with inflation. So that is where a lot of this talk of projected deficits is coming in, because we are going to have to continue to find ways to save some of this money. Things like the Medicare Advantage. A lot of that gets eaten up because of that simple fact that our general fund revenue does not keep up as we go through. And Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, we're at about $1 million a year in savings, just under?
Yeah, it started off being. It did start off being about $1 million a year, but then that is obviously those premiums are also increasing. So it's, we're losing some of that savings. Even though if we were with traditional insurance, that would have risen at a more robust rate. So overall, there is that savings. And I will say that this year, with changes that the current administration made to Medicare Advantage plans, those plans have also increased quite a bit. So we're losing some of that savings.
Said that if we restored it to the 2015 level, that in 2031, we would have a deficit.
Yes.
Right? And another thing that, so I was curious, how does your model take into consideration properties that were, I don't know if financed through the city is the right word, but like the development, I live in Wilson Park Homes right over here. And I know that the builder was given a 10-year incentive, essentially, that the city has to refund back our property taxes. How is that? So that's just one example.
Right.
That was the same thing at the Parkdale community as well. Does your model take into consideration that?
The incentives coming off.
Because I mean, those 28 homes, you said property taxes they don't go up fast, but if all of a sudden you're getting the city in 2016 and 17 is when the incentive payback should fall off. How is that taken into consideration in your model for the 28 homes in Wilson Park and the, 180 units? Parkdale? I'm just curious.
So that is one of the things, right? Like we are modeling, so we aren't able to take everything into account. So that would absolutely make a change in the model and could.
So is that captured in your model is my question.
Right, it isn't cleanly.
Okay, so we have property taxes, but we know what those amounts are, right? We know what that bump will be in 17 and 18 when the incentive payoff that the city owes back to the developer comes off. And we also know what that should be about for Parkdale. So one of the concerns that came up during the Finance Review Committee was accounting for things like that, because that will be a windfall to the city, something that's not currently in the 3-year budget window.
Right. Yeah, and that will help.
And that's on the revenue side.
Yeah, that would help for sure.
Okay, so I think it would be if there was a way that we could figure out to add that into these projections, it would be really helpful, I think.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Phil, do you? Thank you. Phil, our finance director, Phil is coming up to give a little more info.
Yeah, I understand the scenario that you're talking about. Problem is it's very difficult to predict what property values are going to be 4 or 5 years in advance, or the 10 years when you're talking about when it would fall off. Go ahead.
I understand that because a lot of those properties in Parkdale they've actually increased the tax base quite a bit. And my understanding is that the portion of those taxes that should come back to the city is actually being refunded to the developer right now. So the city is actually cutting a check for that, right? So whatever that check amount is, plus 2%, or just keep that consistent, because I'll tell you, it's 28 homes. I understand there's a lot of homes in the city, but a good 10 of them have turned over and doubled in value. And so that does add a lot to the tax base. And so I think that it's very difficult to come asking for revenue when there is actually a revenue windfall in the window of within the next 3 to 5 years for the city. So it would be great if we could factor that into determining what the city needs.
So hold on real quick. Phil, these are, we collect the entire tax right now and then reimburse.
For those developers that qualify for the TIF, and it's usually
Right. And there's also.
So as far as the actual revenue goes, there shouldn't be any change because that has to be.
It would only go up.
That's already accounted for in the revenue. There's an expenditure that is then on the other side accounted for as well.
Right. So currently, any of that revenue for the city comes in and goes out.
Right.
Until you've reached the $3 million or whatever it was that the city gave to the developer to develop those properties. But there's also scenarios that the city has where they're going to be, certain areas are going to be developed again, and those same developers are probably coming back and asking for those same incentives, which may or may not be required. But I'm saying that those can be taken into consideration in this outlook, and instead of just saying, oh, we're going to run out of money in 2031, it's not taking into consideration that huge bump in property taxes that the city is actually going to have in a short window.
Yeah, and I absolutely hear you. What that will actually do is less on the revenue side and more, it will show as less of an expenditure in the future. So yes, accounting, but.
So I'm not saying
that
that would get you all the way there,
right.
But I do know that it will help, right?
It can.
It's possible, but you also have to factor in the rollback, because while there's going to be an increase in the property values, kind of what we've been saying even during the finance committee, because I remember you from the finance committee.
Yes, of course.
It's going to still continue to roll back. So even though we're going to see, because I see what you're saying, when it sunsets that 10-year window, what your logic is that we should have a windfall of revenue that we should have available to use.
To use to.
Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so.
And then we also have future development opportunities, which we can't.
Yeah, that we can't predict.
No one has a crystal ball, but we do know that there's a church over there that had its last service that is looking to probably sell and be developed, and probably going to be approaching the city for something, and that can be taken into consideration once we know that that's a possibility. I mean, developers don't come. So all I'm saying is there's a big revenue portion that I see that's not being captured in these projections, and it would be great to actually include that, or include a consistent, because it is a check that we're writing, and I'm sure somebody could go search online and find out what that check is. But the city does know, because they are cutting that check to Robertson every year, right?
Yeah, well, they're getting reimbursement for what
Right.
they paid in their property tax. So yeah,
Right.
so it's like for the city, it's a wash. And so after the 10 years, yes, the revenue for that one particular parcel is going to go up. And so
One particular parcel.
I'm saying, well, that group of parcels.
Okay.
Like Wilson Park or
All right.
Ferndale or what have
Yeah.
you. So that the the taxable value, while it may increase, we're still going to be limited. And again, that's what I'm saying. It's hard to project what that dollar amount is going to be to relay that and include it in the model.
Well, we could include something, because we know that it's going to be something.
It's partially included.
It's not. We
Yeah, I mean, it's,
confirm that it's not. And because the budgeting window is 3 years, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know off the top of my head, maybe you don't, Phil, when is
Off the top of my head, probably not.
what's that?
Off the top of my head, probably not.
When is Parkdale going to fall off?
I would have to look it up. I'm not sure.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But it's not far away.
Again, I would have to look. I don't know when Parkdale started. It started before I got here, so it should sunset. I've been here 3 years, so it's before. I'm not sure what that date is. Yeah, well, like I said, I don't know off the top of my head.
Large windfall.
Yeah, when you're talking about, Tom Kaiser, Withington, when you're talking about the millage, what's that worth in terms of dollars and cents?
So, for this current fiscal year, we levied approximately what would be 14.4 million in property taxes. With this one, we would be at the first year 16.1, and that would essentially stay 16.1 and the peak would be 16.2 at the end. So once, as I said a little bit ago, like it doesn't, once you get that initial bump, that's pretty much what you're working with for the next 10 years.
Ray Crusette. So the November ballot, the portion of the operating expense in the Headlee Override that was voted down, that was 4.2 mils?
Roughly, it was to restore, it would have been a total of just over 8 mils total. And the 4 would have been for the facilities.
Excluding the facilities.
So yeah, it would have been about 4.2.
Operating expense was 4.2, and now you're asking us how we feel about 5.4.
Yes.
Just wondering what the logic is in asking how we feel about an additional mill when we just voted down 4.2.
So what was voted down was a restoration to 20, which included those facilities as well as the operating. So what we're
You're
trying,
already saying that you're looking at a separate bond for that, for
we're
facilities.
also looking at multiple models tonight. So let's not get hung up on just a single model. We are trying to find where that sweet spot is. Some of the feedback we've received was that the operating millage was okay. People would support a little more. So far, this poll right now is showing that this might be too little. So there are multiple opinions and we're trying to get them all.
Okay.
Simon Cohen, just to go back earlier, did I hear you that the home for most of this is police wages?
I'm sorry?
When you were asked where the home for this was, did you say it was police wages?
The home is, so the additional money will likely cover the inflationary expenses for police wages as well as other personnel.
The additional 5.4 or the additional?
You're looking at, this is not an additional 5.4 over what's currently levied.
We're paying for something.
Yeah, right, this last year was about 4.28.
Okay.
Next year, it's projected to be 4.19-ish.
Okay, so the additional 1 mil, you're expecting to largely go to personnel?
Yeah,
And most of that is police?
83% of police and fire costs are personnel.
83, what percent of personnel?
69% of general fund is personnel costs.
What percent of personnel is the police cost?
Police and fire make up about 57% of the general fund.
How much of that is fire?
How much of that is fire? Fire typically is at 6 million a year. Police is at 8.3.
And we're looking to increase that?
That's not just personnel. That is
Okay.
all-inclusive. That is operating expenses. That is capital expenses, vehicles, all of that.
Okay. Are we struggling in the police department
We are struggling to maintain staff.
because of wages? They're moving out
Because
of
of
the city?
wages, because of facilities, we have issues that we are trying to address.
Okay. And they're coming to us and saying, you're paying us too little, we're leaving?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we will move on to the next idea. This one is a higher increase. And as I just said, we're looking at multiple options. Our last poll just showed that the restoring to the 2015 level was too little. So this one is a 2 mil increase over what is currently rolled back to the 4.2. In this scenario, we'll be at a tax rate that is just slightly higher than that between fiscal years 2018 and 2021, a total of approximately 17.4 mils. In 2018, we were at 16.9917, which is what we maintained for a few years there. So we still would have to be looking at identifying efficiencies, cost-cutting scenarios, as we are projected a year later than the previous scenario in 2032. And all of these models are using the same assumptions to try and be standard, with the exception of course, the Headlee Override. So this one, we'll open this one up to see everybody's opinions. The 6.2, this will give us a little bit more opportunity to increase costs or increase expenses in capital, to start making some improvements, not deferring maintenance. As I showed last night, we have been consistently not investing in capital. We had about 4.7 million in this fiscal year that was requested in capital expenses, and we only funded about 2.3. That stuff doesn't go away, it just gets more expensive. This would give us a little more flexibility in the next few years to be able to do so. However, again, as we get closer towards the later years and we've had Headlee rollbacks and other inflationary pressures, we'll still have to be looking at other expenditure cuts. Okay, we'll give people a couple more minutes, then we can kind of process this one. Okay, so this one is a little more spread out, I guess. 4 people are saying too much, 8 are saying about right, 4 are saying too little. Does anybody want to offer thoughts on this one? And also, I know we have some people online that I think Riley's been getting questions. No? Okay. Okay. Yeah, Dave looks like he's got a question.
But the way you explained it, yeah, the
And yeah, the way they asked the question was provided me more clear ideas on, okay, you know, you maintain the buildings better, and that appeals to me because I don't like how they, you know, I want them actually to be maintained and not waste expenses.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I will preface this as well, this also doesn't, I mean, this wouldn't be being able to build new buildings, you know, that extra mill isn't going to be enough to build new buildings, or it's going to, you know, we're going to still be trying to address current issues, but hopefully better fund capital issues so that we don't have more expensive emergency issues come up later down the line. Okay. So then the next scenario we have is to restore the voter authorized operational millage at the current level, you know, that it's rolled back to. So basically just extending what we currently have. So this would be for the next tax year, 4.2 mils for the additional voter authorized operating millage for a total of 15.4. Immediately, we would be looking at finding ways, this including trying to help get our police department to a more competitive wage. We would need on the other end to be looking at about 137,000 of expenditure cuts in the immediate fiscal year. And that number will grow over the life of that. So at some point we would be, this is the first one where if we don't make changes, the deficit that happens would balloon to a point where we would deplete fund balance by 2033. Not trying to use it as a scare tactic, but it is something we would have to be looking at, and we would be needing to make cuts with this. It would keep us a little more constrained than the other two options for sure. So with that, oh, we can, yeah.
137.
137, so.
What's the first to go? What's the second to go?
So, as I was talking about earlier, you know, about 18% of our general fund budget is capital expenses and operations. So before we hit anything with personnel, we'd have to be looking at making changes there.
Okay.
Now, again, here we are talking, we were just talking about being able to finally start funding some things so it's not as expensive in the future. We'd probably have to defer a lot of capital costs. And then look towards other efficiencies in operations, trying to avoid, you know, because again, we are in the business of providing service. Service means people, you know, trying to avoid that.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to hammer on the point too hard, but I think, you know, we're looking at, you know, efficiencies in a lot of the budget, and personnel is such a huge part of the budget, and such a huge part of the personnel budget is the police. Are we looking at efficiencies there?
Yeah, the police department is looking at ways to improve operations, improve spending, looking at ways to try and get leaner as far as their expenditures go.
If I could weigh in, James.
Absolutely, please.
I want to provide some perspective on how our operations and the scale of our operations evolved where they're at now. You got to remember when I started in 1997, it was 52 sworn officers. We're operating at 42 sworn officers right now. There has been substantial cuts. There's been reorganization. We used to work at 8-hour shifts, which took more people. We were ultimately forced back in 2010 when we laid off 20% of our department and had to buy people out. We reorganized to 12-hour shifts. That didn't come at a cost. We used to operate with higher minimum staffing levels. We lowered those staffing levels already again. I'm here to tell you we're running as lean as we can to provide the basic service that we have to by charter. So to say that there is more to cut, I would argue that there is not. And again, that our officers are currently 12 to 15% behind our competitors as far as municipalities. They're already that far behind, so it provides strain. So I want to provide an accurate picture that someone says, well, just scale back. We're pretty much scaled back as much as we can at this point based on those historical numbers, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Chief. That was really good.
Ray Crusette. So just to reiterate, this that you're showing here is identical to the operating expense portion that was on the November ballot.
Yes.
And that we were all told would not result in any layoffs or cuts to services.
Exactly. And that's what I was just saying. We would be avoiding that. We would have to look at other efficiencies, but.
The other two proposals were increases over that. You know, in bargaining, it's not unusual to ask high as a bargaining position.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We're just showing the models here, showing the options.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, Quinn's got one.
Yep, Quinn Ziegler. I would like us to be clear about the words that we're choosing, because you're saying we need to look for efficiencies. And efficiencies are great, right? This HR benefits, Medicare, improved benefits for employees, cut the costs. Great, that is an efficiency. At what point, in which year, do efficiencies actually mean cuts to service? Because there's a difference between efficiencies that save money, make things better, or at least leave things in the same position that they're in, and a cut that is going to change services. So at what point, if this is what was voted on, would we have to start cutting services?
So assuming we're able to make up that initial assumed deficit of about 160,000, we would be able to buy at least 4 or 5 years before we had to really start digging deep again. Without having crystal ball, maintaining what we currently have, the first time we see a real solid deficit of $1 million would be the fiscal year 2030. Up until then, you know, we're looking $160,000, and then that will compound, of course. If we're able to cut some now, that's that course correction, right? You make a couple moves on the compass one way, you end up, you know, 3 miles off course, right? And so trying to get back where we're trying to get to, if that answered your question. Okay, so we will take a straw poll on this one. Okay, still got a couple coming in, but does anybody want to offer anything else on this one before we move forward? And okay, let's move on to the, I mean, of course, another option is to do nothing. Kind of based on what we were just seeing on that poll, this probably is not going to be palatable for the majority. But in this instance, you know, we would levy one more year of the current Headlee Override, and we would need to begin looking for massive service cuts. We would be needing to address approximately $4 million in fiscal year 2027. By the end, by 10 years out, you're looking at an operating millage of 9.4, which is less than half what our charter original operating millage was. So we can talk about this one or just move into the voting on this one. Okay. So this is the no renewal, allow it to expire. And honestly, this is, considering what we just saw in the last one, this is kind of what I was expecting. So those are the options I've prepared to show you tonight. It seems like there's a lot of opinions varying between all of them. And I would like to open it up now for general feedback and suggestions on other options that you might want us to explore. So.
I'm sorry I missed the beginning of the presentation. This was shared, but can you share some of the assumptions in your model? Like, for example, how long of a look back does it include? What % of new home sales does it assume each year to account for the reset? And then also other incremental values. I just did a super quick calculation that would be about, if assuming new sales, about $300,000 to $600,000 of or reduced expenditure. So I am just curious about the assumptions of the model itself.
So in order to be able to model out a bunch of scenarios in a relatively short time, we did have to use some basic. We used a CPI of 2%. We used a Headlee rollback factor of what would be 2%. So the millage would roll back basically by 2% every year at the same time as the taxable value would increase. Now, of course, if we start having multiple uncappings, now our Headlee is going to roll back even more. And then if an inevitable property crash happens, we're in really bad shape. So that was the general. We also did like a CPI of about 2 on most of the expenses, with the exception of the first couple years. The first couple years we have as our triennial budget. And so we did inflationary expenses thereafter. And then same thing on the variable revenues. So it does include various things that we know are going to happen. Like this current fiscal year, there's been a lot of park development that's gone on. Next year, that's not going to be the case quite as much. So there's a decrease of about $1 million there. So we've got some of the hard numbers, and then some of it is, unfortunately, because of the situation, a little bit less hard, you know.
I think, was it yesterday, the city just passed an approval for all R1 zoning to go to R3 and R4. I don't know on whether you or not you included it in the model, but just like a gut check maybe from anyone here, do we know what that's going to look like in terms of property tax? Is it going to help? Is it going to hurt?
So we didn't rezone all R1. What we did was allow duplexes and accessory dwelling units as a right within the R1 district, and then triplexes and quads will be allowed through a special land use.
Okay.
We haven't been able to really project, but we don't anticipate, just like we haven't had a lot of push for them in where they're allowed now, we haven't had, we don't anticipate a massive push for the tri and quadplexes in the R1. So I'd be shocked if it had a major impact as far as property values go on taxable value.
Thank you.
Any other general comments?
I don't know what we're using this survey for, if it's just for discussion tonight. I mean, obviously the voters spoke in November, and that's probably more significant than what's happening tonight, right? So we also don't know what the police proposal looks like. So it's hard to, you know, right, to offer the whole picture to people and say, are you willing to, you know, absorb another $400 increase on your taxes or something when you're, you know, not offering that right now.
That's fair. And honestly, the operating, making sure we're able to provide services is the priority right now. We need to be able to, it wouldn't make a ton of sense to have a brand new building and nobody able to work in it.
Okay, so this is an opinion, this is just an opinion, but my fear is, what I think is possible is that the voters would be happy to support the police and the fire and their operations. And I think they're also willing to do some damage to the city. And that is something I think we have to take seriously when we're building these proposals, you know, and we have to, let's succeed. You know, let's put something together that's going to succeed. So we're not having this conversation in October of next year, or, you know. So that's up to this point. If that's premature, I'm sorry, but I just wanted to share that. So
no, I think that's fair, and that's why, you know, that's why we're doing this, is to try and, yeah, this, within the framework of tonight, this helps us hone, you know, obviously throw out some of the, you know, some of the proposals that are less likely to be supported, but to help us move forward and get to a point where we do think we have something that can be supported by a majority of the residents in the community. And a bond proposal for a building, it's hard to say at this moment. And the issue is interest rates are constantly changing. You know, right now we could see a bond proposal that we would estimate about, you know, 1.7 mils, right? And we could have an issue where interest rates go crazy and now it's 2.7. So it's hard to model that out right now as we speak. But the point is valid. Anybody else?
I'm going to add a little bit to that. I wholeheartedly agree with that comment that in this room, it's a group of highly engaged individuals, right? I think it will struggle to pass. I will go even further. I think that if the city doesn't give something up or reduce, not just reduce the incremental, but reduce overall, I don't think it will pass. And we want to have a sustainable city that we all want to love and live in. But I think there's got to be a demonstration of just not just reducing the ask or reducing the length, but showing some serious, like, going back to the drawing board and thoughtful communication about that.
Well, so I'll push a little bit. What does that mean to you? What does...
I don't know. So I'm also not as informed as the rest of the group here. So I don't know, like, what the whole balance sheet is or what your annual budget is and what those expenditures are. This is like a sacrificial concept, right? I'm not saying this, but, like, I love the composting program. I use it all the time, but that's something that you could eliminate without a lot of hurt, even from someone who deeply loves it, right? Like, something like that I think there has to be some components. And I know everyone in this room is looking at me and I'm gonna get, like, eggs thrown at my house tonight, but I think it's gotta be something for the larger, greater good. Otherwise, the 60% or 65% of people who voted, and the majority of those people who aren't here, are going to vote the same way. And we can have these conversations in a room like this where most of our citizens aren't participating.
Right. I will preface a little bit there. The composting program.
Look, I know. I mean, like, what are the items, right, that like we could give up and like have a real conversation about that and make some hard choices. Like, I think a lot of us are in jobs right now where we're always making hard choices about what we fund and what we don't fund. And if we're not doing that here as a city, it's not going to pass. And we have to show that hard work, that real introspection that we did. Otherwise, it's going to be the same exact situation while we'll just be hoping.
Yeah, but as I was saying, the composting program is covered under a completely different portion of the budget, not the general fund.
I do love the composting.
But for just clarity, the general fund funds general government services. So things like, city council, city manager's office, city communications, budget, finance, the clerk and election department, IT, facilities, legal services, HR, the district court, police, fire, some DPW, general services, the motor pool, our street lighting, community and economic development, which is generally covered by charges for services anyway. And then parks, recreation programming, special events. Those are the types of things that general fund covers.
So something you said just resonated with me, and you said, like, how do you show it? How do you communicate what this is for? Essentially, in saying that that something that's going to pass needs to be communicated well. And if you ask me, if you go back to that slide where it showed the average police officer wage and had something that said, we have, Chief Emmy, did you say 42 sworn officers? So if you said, we would like to have 50, and this is what it costs to be competitive, and it actually gave like a really high level breakdown of what the people are voting for, and then we're capable of following through with that. I think that's what you're saying, right? And I think that makes sense to me, as opposed to sort of like a blank check, right? Saying people are willing to pay for their services, for the services that they value. If you vote for this, it's going to be an additional $2 million. This million is going to go towards this. This million is going to go towards that. And this is not, have it be clear is what you're saying. Yeah. I mean, if the city was capable of communicating some sort of next proposal that this is what you are voting for, and this is what it's going to go towards, and then we're able to follow up and show that this is exactly what it went towards, people would be more comfortable with that.
Yeah, I just had, what's the percentage of the population that's 65 years and over? They're the taxpayers, do you know? Because just remember, they're getting big increases in their Medicare costs, Social Security, and then they got their Medicare, I think they have to pay extra. Anyway, it doesn't go as far as it does. And then they got a problem with Part D. There's going to be more and more elderly people who have to pay out-of-pocket expenses toward medical. Besides that, all your insurance has gone up. My insurance has gone up 40% for car, house insurance, and you have to figure that because these people that are on fixed incomes, okay, if they don't have a savings, they don't have Bitcoin, they're screwed because they're only getting 0.5% on their savings. And you have to understand that because these people are going to say,
So currently we have approximately 1,600 households with seniors. 16, that's about 10% of the total households. Mm-hmm. Yeah. $8.5%. 900 votes, I think. Yeah.
I just want one comment. I think it would be a mistake if you guys were thinking about trying to put the operating proposal out on its own without taking care of the police that you guys made a big deal out of in the last round. I think it's going to be a big mistake. So I would advise against that, you know, for whatever that's worth.
Hi, Raylon Mayer. So, James, would it be helpful, or even to Kara, to really go back to the presentation we had months ago that showed the tiers in which the cuts would affect which departments and things like that? Just so, I think I heard this lady up front say, what would the city be giving up? And I think we probably need to show what those tiers look like again, because it was a while ago.
Yeah, let me see if I could pull that up real quick. And Kara, if you have it quickly, if you want to send it to the Teams lectern. Yeah.
Just to, I think, echo some of the comments from the room, it sounds like what we have is, and I think comments that I've had, conversations that I've had about this outside of this room, seems like what we really have is a communication problem, right? That if we can communicate what we're paying for, people in Ferndale like Ferndale, right? Some people in Ferndale like some parts of Ferndale, and I think if we can, yeah, I think there's some cause, right? Like a lot of us voted that one of the proposals was too high, right? I think there's a limit for all of us, and I think if we can get the facts out, a lot of people that I talked to before November had no idea what the Headlee was, no idea what the override was, and you have like 3 triple negatives in the override, and I think what we, you know, I think what I would like to see come out of this is, you know, if this is what convinces people to fund the city, get this out. You know, figure out what communication is lacking, where the actual line is with the maybe less engaged voters. I don't know if that's hitting the streets and knocking doors or, you know, finding ways to reach them.
I'm just pulling up that presentation.
Another question until that happens.
Yep, go for it.
Is there a communication plan in regards to marketing to the citizens by chance? Because I think what's happening is everyone hates newsletters. I work in communications, I deal with it all the time. The engagement rate with newsletters are crap. I think it needs to be a branded communication in regards to what exactly is being proposed. And then for even more detail, it needs to be on the website. And then figure out the click rate and figure out if people are actually engaging in that.
Yeah, because we don't have a proposal yet, you know, we are honing that, but that is a good idea. Just give me 1 second here. Oh. Uh-huh. Let's see if this is. Yeah, the first tier is $800,000. And a lot of that, you know, it's software, it's things like the newsletter, it's IT security, that sort of stuff. I might not be able to show it because it doesn't look like it's letting me, but Joe's presentation from April is on the website. We still have the active Headlee page from this last year. So let me go on here.
James, if I may make a suggestion, can you show the website?
Ooh, I think I could. All right. So right here, you go to the ferndalemi.gov site. First thing you see, you can click on it. We have a lot of resources, the state tax estimator, a newsletter from Summer. That's why I was. And then right here in the corner, you'll see a link to the video where the budget cut scenarios were presented, where we were targeting just shy of $4 million. And
Under the government tab?
it's homepage.
Homepage?
Homepage, first thing you see. And so the tier 1 cuts included some cuts to public works, parks and rec, IT, special events, city comms, and then some operational expenses in the police department. And what that got us was $800,000. So, clear.
I just want to make sure I'm following. You're saying tier 1, was that like a scenario that was proposed, or was it actually conducted?
No, that
The
was,
cuts.
if there is no Headlee override and we have to make up $4 million.
Okay, it was like, this is what
was
would
the scenario planning. These are the, you know, I don't want to call it low-hanging fruit, right? Because these are services that people enjoy, but these would be the first ones that would be on the chopping block, for lack of a better term. Then our tier 2, we start looking at furthering parks and recreation, furthering IT cuts. We've, for the last couple of years, had a couple staff in the city manager's office that essentially go down in half. Human resources, we would be looking at making some cuts. Community and economic development, and then city communications. Still only another $700,000. At this point, we're only at 1.5. So we would still need approximately another 2.5. Tier 3, we start looking at infrastructure and facilities, and that we would be looking at 700,000. Still, you know, not quite there. And that's when we would end up looking at essential services and public safety, which is the last one that was looked at. So this information is on the website, and I think we can try and, the best way to do is watch the presentation that took place. It was, you know, well explained, you know, in a longer time than I just took in the 5 minutes there. But that was a little bit of a summary for everybody.
I just want to echo what the last two gentlemen, but particularly the gentleman over here from marketing, or who proposed kind of a marketing thing, said, that I really do think there is a messaging problem in terms of how this kind of data, these kinds of potential cuts or scenarios are being communicated. And I think we just kind of wind up with people in echo chambers, a lot of times just making up data or pulling things out of the air. And I would also encourage that, you know, it is easier to watch the presentation in some way, but those things can be kind of long, and the average voter is not going to watch those. I mean, the more that you can have some kind of outreach, you know, quick graphics, kind of like the mayor was just suggesting, where it's like, you know, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, I think these are going to be really much easier ways to get this across. And we need to find a way to boil down some of the content from those presentations in a way that's more quickly digestible to the average person doing a quick scroll on their phone to get their news about Ferndale.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sometimes you might not hear it in here. depending on how the volume's working.
Yeah, I'm
If
not
it's
sure it's
on,
working.
yeah, it is. It's good.
Yeah, I just want to make the comment that I've seen Ferndale over the years turned into a urban planning laboratory. A lot of consultants hired, spent a lot of money on that. And at the same time, I don't see a clear method for city council to find out what citizens really desire, what their values are. Instead, we're using consultants to tell them. It's very expensive to do that. And previous administrations have spent a lot of time in the laboratory, but you know, if you're looking for cost savings, for God's sakes, stop with the consultants and find out what people really want. And if we had a better tool for doing that, it would be great. I appreciate the voting up here that you've been doing this, the snap polls, but that's not really indicative of what the broad population wants.
Absolutely. It's a snapshot of the people in the room and watching online.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And how do you really find out what everybody wants and break that down? And, you know, does city council really align with what the majority of the population of Ferndale wants?
Good feedback.
Yeah, I just want to ask a follow-up question and ask, how much have we spent on consultants over these kind of urban planning laboratory years? Whatever period of years that comprises.
You know, I don't have that offhand. Because we don't have an in-house engineering department. So if we are doing projects that need engineering, we do have to use consultants. And in this scenario, it is more cost efficient to have a contracted engineer who can work when we need them, as opposed to an engineering department on staff that might not have 100% capacity or be working in 100%, efficiency, if that makes sense.
So are we really kind of bringing in consultants ad hoc then when we see the need for them arise, or are we kind of doing them looking at things down the line?
Doing a little bit of all of it. We use consultants to help with planning. We were using McKenna for our zoning ordinance. That is something that we definitely were not going to have the capacity in-house to be able to do. Okay. Any other questions? And I would, again, encourage people, if you have time, to take a look at stuff we had on the website for the last ballot proposal. Some of it doesn't really relate anymore because this proposal that we were going after in the fall is not what we're doing now. But things like costs, needs, that stuff is still there. So it's a good spot to look at. You can also, if you have questions, what was the email? Was it Ferndale proposals 2024 at Ferndale MI? I think we have that on here. I think it's proposals 2024. That is 2024 proposals at ferndalemi.gov. That is still active. That goes to a couple of us. We try and be as responsive as possible. So if you have any questions after tonight, feel free. But with that, I do want to thank everybody for coming out. Looks like the mayor has.
I just wanted to ask you to kind of just reiterate, what are the next steps, James?
Well, the next steps are taking a look at what we've got here. And then maybe looking at another way to get some more community feedback. And then what we need to do in order to have a proposal on a May ballot, we need to have the language to the county in early February. So within the next couple of meetings, the city council is going to have to make a decision on what they are looking at. So still have a couple weeks here, but not a lot of time. This is taking up a lot of staff time right now because this is so important.
First, I think you did a good job, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
I don't know if this would be helpful for the majority of people, but I would love to see, a sort of a bond expert come in and say, this is what $20 million looks like, this is what $40 million looks like, we're going to pay 6% on 40 million, we're going to pay 8%, and what that mill is going to be, and kind of break that down. And in terms of facilities, where can we start with, let's not say the minimum, but let's solve your issues. And then, as a community, we can say, we value this, +1, +2, or, in other words, give them, more than the basics, but maybe not $45 million or something, right? I mean, and I understand that interest rates are fluctuating and things like that, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but if we could at least maybe go through that exercise. Maybe it's not helpful, but for me, it would kind of solve that, that unknown of, how do we help these folks and eliminate that argument going forward,
Right.
Okay.
For sure. And we do have an ongoing relationship with bond counsel, as well as a financial advisor. Whenever you issue bonds, you have to have a financial advisor on record, as well as your bond counsel. And we are working with them to start crafting some of those numbers exactly like you're asking.
Yeah, unless you put it into dollars and cents, millage means nothing to the average person.
Right.
They can't compute it.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to hang around for a little bit if anybody has questions or just wants to sidebar. But really, thank you all for coming out tonight. This was helpful. I think we got some good feedback. Thank you. I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season.